Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. It's wonderful to see your faces again. And I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who is leading us this week.
Thank you. It's good to be together again. Thank you. Sorry I missed last week, Craig. I heard it was good. We're going to keep going. I've got a new I'm going to follow the pattern of Sean again. Found that was really helpful. So song and prayer and conversation. The prayer I want to bring today comes from a new book that I've just found that I'm excited about. It just came out. Sarah Bessey, A Rhythm of Prayer. She edited a collection of prayers from folks, mostly North America. And it was written last year. So very applicable to experience in time of COVID. So the prayer I'd like to start us with is a prayer to learn to love the world again. Let us pray. God of herons and heartbreak, teach us to love the world again. Teach us to love extravagantly, knowing it will break our hearts. And teach us that it's worth it. God of pandemics and suffering ones, teach us to love the world again. God of loneliness and longing, of bushfires and wilderness, of soup kitchens and border towns, of snowfalls and children, teach us to love the world again. Amen. And a song to call us in. I'm going to post the words. Hopefully they'll come up. Do you see that in the chat? To God our thanks we give. So I'll just sing this through. And the last line, we flip it. Our thanks to God we give instead of to God. So I'll sing it through a few times and I invite you to join in as you're able. You might already know this one. Often people will use this as a grace. I love it as an entry. Here we go. To God our thanks we give, to God our thanks we give, to God our thanks we give, our thanks to God we give. To God our thanks we give, to God our thanks we give, to God our thanks we give, our thanks to God we give, to God our thanks 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 we give.
Wild nights, wild nights. Wild nights, wild nights. Were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds, to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, the sea, might I but moor tonight in thee.
Thank you, Meg. That's wonderful.
And just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Those who believe in him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light, and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds have been done in God.
Thanks, Regan. That's great. So love, we're talking about love. I'm going to flip us back to our poem. We'll start there. But my first question is, how do you experience and feel deeply loved? what are the ways that love is known to you greatly? I am, tipping my hand to the 5 love languages. So that what are the ways that you experience love and know it deeply in your own being? What are some examples?
I really enjoy a good visit.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure which one of the 5 that is, but it just feels great to get in a good, intense 45-minute catch up with kids dragging on my pants, and I don't even care. I'm visiting.
That quality time together. Yeah.
I feel deeply loved when I wake up in the morning and my husband reaches over and cuddles me and says, "I love you."
Oh, love that. Yeah. Thank you. That touch, right? Touch is important, and words, right? Mm-hmm.
And I feel that love through my family all the time. So I'm very grateful for my family that God's given me.
Well, I'm gonna stop sharing because I want to see everybody's face. There we go. What are some other ways that we feel deeply loved, that we know love?
I actually feel deeply loved by God when I'm walking in a serene forest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, this isn't me specifically, but my grandpa's been kind of in and out of the hospital, and he's staying with us for a little bit, and it's just, I feel a lot of love seeing him and seeing my mom take really great care of him.
Very cool. That's safety, that being known together. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My husband and I take our 4 kids, who are a little bit older now, often backpacking for 4 or 5 day trips in the mountains, and just spending time together with literally 0 distractions is probably a love highlight for me.
Cool. Outside in creation and together. Yeah, that theme coming up again.
I feel loved when I receive words of encouragement and affirmation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was telling Kendra about this earlier. I was having a conversation with a group of women on Tuesday, and it was about hard stuff. But after we chatted through the first question, we realized we were all in the same place. And so in some weird way, I felt loved and cared for because I realized I wasn't alone. We're all struggling with COVID, and we're all wrestling through pandemic. That was a moment of love for me. So our poem and our scripture, we talk about love today. Emily's poem talks about that wild love, that intimate love. And I love that she ties it into creation, right? She ties it into this wild storm and being docked in port and resting somewhere. What themes do you pick up from this? Before we dive into questions about love, what things do you see in this poem? What catches you? What surprised you? What are you not sure about? What do you love about it?
I like the classic image of what's the line? Ship and port is safe, but that's not what they were made for. But this is the same thing, but rephrased, and I like that line. Futile the winds to a heart in port, and thinking about the possibility that comes with winds, right, is what it's encouraging us, that if you let go of some of that safety and done with the compass and the chart, and you trust,
yeah,
some interesting things can happen.
I like that. The possibility of the winds.
Yeah, possibility.
The part that I don't understand in it is all of a sudden how come it's rowing in Eden? I don't get it. Can somebody help me with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The one thing marked in our little resource here refers to they write, both texts invite us to consider a radical intimacy between lover and love, divine and human, so intimate in fact as to be kind of communion. Rowing in Eden is, as they think of it, as a kind of communion. So maybe hearkening back to that garden, that Adam and Eve together in Eden. That's the Salt Commentary's thought about that. Does anybody else have a thought about rowing in Eden, what it might be connecting to? Sean?
Oh, well, I mean, the one commentary I read was that this has definitely got a lot more to do with Emily Dickinson writing about romantic love and kind of a passionate encounter with the lover, right? So it's much more Song of Solomon, Song of Songs kind of thing, rather than just sort of the safe kind of love, right? You know, the church kind of love we like to talk about. This has probably got a lot more to do with that. You know, so like when I read Rowing in Eden, and when I look at this, done with the compass, done with the chart, done with all of the other things, it's just this passionate encounter with the other, right? So I think that's what the poem sits in its originality, and then I have to figure out with sort of like biblical erotic poetry in the sense, you know, the sense that God's passion is that too, is that big, is that like, you know, to feel those emotions too. So I think it definitely strays deeply into that territory as a poem, right? And so, you know, Rowing in Eden and At the Sea, I mean, this is the encounter of the lover and the beloved, I think, is what I see a lot more there. Yeah.
Yeah, so the tie to "for God so loved the world," right? What does that love look like? This passionate, deep embrace. It's not a surface. You are loved. You're great. You're fantastic.
You're great.
What does love mean? Like the love of a child and a parent, that fierce love. Or what does love mean? The love of a partner, that's the kind of love we're getting at. God loved the world. I know I'm going to get into that question later. I know we use that John 3:16 in such divisive ways in our communities. And so how do we, my hope is that we can wrestle with, what does that fierce, passionate love of God look like for the world? Okay. Back to the poem. What else are people seeing? Tim.
Yeah, I guess kind of along the lines of where Sean was alluding, you know, so much of my life is sort of calculated and metered, you know, because I have responsibilities and I have people who are counting on me. And yeah, sometimes you have to just work, you know, but this poem invites such a, you know, just a wild, loose, like there is no compass here, you know, like we're just letting go of all that. And some piece of that's really intriguing to me, you know. Yeah. And I think Sean alludes, it could even become uncomfortable because it's not calculated and sort of sanctioned. Like this is somewhere between, in the middle of a storm, we're treating it as if we're in a harbor, you know. At least I hear these two metaphors at play, right? Mm-hmm. Is this a storm or are we in a harbor? Like, what is it? And they're like, we don't care. I'm going to live into this. Now, when we liken it to Jesus, you know, we don't really experience Jesus as a sexual entity. But certainly his intimacy with God leads him on a path that is not anything that we would walk down. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I'm not worried about it. I'm in Eden. Mm. And it takes him totally different places.
Yeah. And that the certainty I hear in what you're saying too, right? The certainty of Jesus, and in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the chaos. I had we have a young woman that does our PowerPoint, and the image she chose for both this and the scripture was a wild storm. Like, picture the waves, huge, white caps, overwhelming. That was the image that she chose, and I thought it was so evocative of the wild, out of controlness of our poem today. Other thoughts on our poem?
Well, and I think it like everybody encounters like that invitation to something a little more wild in different ways, right? Because the idea of like, if you're trying to order everything in your life and it's simply not working, then you need a little bit more wildness to break a few more rules to kind of loosen it up so that you can get some, some actual kind of authenticity to your life. And then other people are probably too far down this wild and crazy, and they're actually doing damage to themselves and others as they, because there aren't enough solid boundaries and rules and stuff like that, right? And I'm remembering I listened to Nadia Bolz-Weber podcast yesterday about just trusting your gut and the importance of how many things we do in life that, like, we encounter. She was talking to a woman who had been in a cult, but the rules and the orderedness of the cult had these super attraction, but she learned to not trust her gut, right? And so I again, as somebody who tends to stay in port more than being out on the wild seas, I look at this with sort of like, oh, that's so exciting to look at all the wildness of the ocean, but my gut says I better, that's maybe not for me right now, right? Like, it's to just I have other responsibilities in my life, so it's this weird balance of things. Some people needing to be more wild, some people needing to be a little less, right? So yeah.
And how that wildness can help create vision or help spark something in you. Like, how does that become a jumping off point for you, even as you're moored, right? Where do you see that getting lived out?
Sometimes even just becoming aware of your longings, even if you can't fulfill them, makes you feel more alive.
Yeah, I mean, even thinking about time right now. Well, it was interesting. I heard an interview this morning with a doctor at CBC, and they were talking about the pattern of some of our elders getting their vaccine, and the first thing they go and do is go and get a hug from their grandkids. And I mean, his further down the conversation, it was around like, wait, you have to wait. You need 2 weeks for the vaccine to kick in. But that need or that want for intimacy and connection was so great. Like, that's the first thing. Yeah. So this is a question then to ask us. We're hovering around it already, so I want to dive into it. What does a radical intimacy between lover and beloved look like? What does it look like for humanity? And what does it look like for us and God? Maybe us and the faith communities that we belong to. What does that radical intimacy between lover and beloved look like in our faith communities? How is that lived out? And how is it lived out for us?
I don't think it's lived out very often, but it seems to me that if you're going to have a real intimacy, you have to be willing to be vulnerable first. And that's a scary thing.
Hugely huge. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this poem is speaking a lot to the vulnerability that is required. And it's not how we think of a church community in that radical intimacy, but I think it certainly is why not? Why can't that be a goal? But it requires a lot more trust than I think we're perhaps used to putting into those communities.
Mm-hmm.
I think going to church camp can be a radical intimacy, and I've had it before with family camp and things. So that can be a little, you can do more things in that community than you would do in your own church setting.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That's why I'm still here.
I remember reading when I was a young man in C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, he points out that being like wildly in love is not sustainable. You know, like you just can't function when you're infatuated. And you know, he's relating this to then the Christian life and how you sort of need this catalyst experience to like drive you to a greater vision or greater purpose, and you need to revisit that once in a while when you grow stale. Maybe that's what Lent is about, right? Is spicing things up, not making it less spicy. But yeah, it's hard to sustain. Like we can only do Lent for 40 days, you know, and we barely even do it well. But when you're just passionate, wildly in love, it takes over your life.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday. A woman, she was talking about that passionate first part of love, and she's a very anxious person. She describes herself as anxiety driven, and she said, when I was the only time I did not experience a daily anxiety was those first days of love with my partner. And so she talked about how do we think about that passion and that knowing that it's, like you said, it's not a sustainable thing, but what does it provide? What is a part of that wild, passionate space? Yeah.
Something that's been impactful for me the past year, that's made me a bit of a different Christian than I was, is, and I'm not at all saying that I believe Jesus is, that these are end times or anything, but, you know, my husband and I start, you know, with the whole virus and everything, we start saying like, what if this is, you know, end times or anything like that? And I really realized, I think that's why the early Christians believed that that Jesus was coming soon, because it has changed so much of the way I look at Jesus, the way I talk to Jesus, and our decisions, even the way we give, spend our time, things like that. And I think that's probably a good thing to for intimacy, for me at least, for intimacy with God, is actually thinking, you know, God could be arriving at any moment, or, you know,
the immediacy of your relationship, the immediacy of this present moment. That's not a bad thing to live in that space. Yeah. Thank you, Meg. Sean?
Something inspiring about the immediacy and the passionate moment. I had a young student walk into my office a year and a half ago and say, hey, my family's still in the refugee camp in Syria. Do you think we could do something about that? And in a wild moment, I said, yeah, let's look into that. And so now I just got my letter this morning from CLWR saying the family's getting an interview, which still means we're probably 6 months to 12 months out. I'm still $32,000 short, not quite sure how I'm going to convince Luther College to continue with me on this path in the middle of a pandemic. But I've got a president who's behind me, and he's not worried about the $32,000. But the wild, passionate moment inspired something that if you really would have sat down and thought about it, you might have thought, no, we can't do that. You know what I mean? Like it took a little bit of an insanity of a love moment to say, like, yeah, look, I love you. You learned English. You're becoming an engineer. You just got married. You just had a baby. Yeah, we're bringing your family over, right? And you know, and again, the more rational brain is like, but how can I help Kusai and not help Kazam and help Kazim and help, you know, all the other people that need, like, I have no idea. I know there's probably a secret lineup forming at my door for everybody who's got a family that they want to bring over from Jordan, right? But at the same time, it's sort of it's kind of an exciting moment to take my community's money and spend it for them. But I don't know. I think there's something about the wild, passionate moment. I like what you say, Tim. It's not sustainable. We can't live in that moment all the way through. And like there's gonna be like we have to allow for the spaces of like questioning and doubt and rest, even, right? More so than always being in that super keyed up place. That's why I'm always impressed with Pentecostals. I'm like, how do you get up every Sunday that high? That is amazing. Like, what about the Sunday where you're just tired and not feeling it, but you've got to still dance, right? Like it's Yeah, like sometimes I really appreciate a nice boring liturgy with some morose hymns. Like let's just be there, you know. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Your Lutheran is showing, John. It's true though. I have a young woman in our class. She's a Pentecostal in our preaching class. And when I said, so our first sermon, 8 to 12 minutes, she went, but I preach for 4 hours, Anne. Like, oh. Kendra asked a good question. How do we support that, Sean? I was just going to say, you do have other chaplains across Canada that might jump on your train, and maybe a camp or two that might support this cool project. So let us know. So jumping off a bit, I want to explore that with our faith communities a bit more. How is that intimacy expressed? I heard trust. I love that. What other ways is that intimacy, that radical intimacy expressed within our faith communities? I mean, Tim, maybe it's even in the expression of your first example, a good visit, that knowing each other, being known by each other. How is that radical intimacy expressed in our faith community?
I don't think this is quite what you're asking, Anne, but I'm sort of reminded in this conversation, Henry Nouwen had this expression of first love and second loves. And the love that we experience through other people is always a second love, that it is a reflection of the love of God. And it's sort of like a 6th generation photocopy back in the days when photocopiers weren't as good, that it's a little fuzzy around the edge and not quite as clear kind of thing. And so I think that's, in part of the gift is in our faith communities, I think, is to see beyond the second love to the first love. And I think to have those sort of eyes to know that, okay, this person can't love me perfectly, or this community can't, but what is behind this? And that, I think that's sort of a gift.
Yeah.
And I'm also reminded that, we talk about this wild, passionate, no compass love, and Barb Stoley for the last 2 weeks has told me to maintain healthy boundaries. So it's like, you can't have it both ways.
There she is, popping in.
There she is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also that I love that the first love and second love, that's a really helpful concept, because I think that we're reminded that we're called all the time. This is not of our own doing. This is God's love first. This is God enabling us to be together, be with each other, be community, serve, love, give. It's not ours, because ours falls flat. And the boundary piece is really important too.
I'm not sure if this goes with answering your question, Anne, but like for me, it's music. Like, and then just specifically to family camp and all the opportunities that we sing, like in the chapel for worship, then at campfire. It's just, it touches my heart. My whole family would just feel so much of that God's there.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. That's holy space. Holy space. When I talk about music with folks, it's like I always point to my heart, and I say it hits deep. It goes inside really. That's kind of my physical reaction when I hear music.
I think particularly in the church community, one of the places that we experience love is in the correction and admonition, the speaking the truth in love. And I think, you think about a child who's being disciplined, and you know that the parent is doing it because they love them. And I think it's harder for us to recognize that in more peer type relationships, that, if you're noticing a sin in my life and correcting it, that's out of love.
That accountability piece with one another. And that comes in deep trust and relationship, knowing each other. I'm not going to be as accountable to the stranger on the street as I am to my friend who knows all the history. Yeah.
I'm just thinking you would have to have a pretty good relationship before you started, that sort of thing with someone. I've been amazed. I try and send cards every once in a while to the elderly shut-ins in our congregation. And when I get a chance to actually talk with them, I'm just amazed at how important those little cards are for them.
Those small acts of intimacy. Yeah. Tim, were you going to say something? I thought I saw your hand pop up there.
Yeah, well, I'm dragging the conversation back a little bit to where Craig was at, which I did find helpful, and it helps me frame some of the other points too. This notion, like in our church, we actually don't expect each other to be the main source of our support, right? We understand that God is the goal, and we aren't there. And by affording ourselves that kind of human imperfection, it creates space, right, for us to be together that I think is necessary. Because everywhere else I go, like if I go somewhere, like I'm supposed to be an expert, or I'm supposed to be profitable, or I'm supposed to be sure and strong and all this. Where in the church, though, as a pastor, I have some expectations of being at least professional, there's room for each other, the way we can be together because we're not expecting perfection. And it creates a different kind of intimacy. And not every church is like that, and not every person feels that. But that's how, Kendra could admonish me and still be with me. Right, which is very different than telling me off and then leaving. So it's something in this, because God is the goal of it. Yeah, it creates a different kind of loving atmosphere. That's what I'm thinking through.
Cool, thank you. You're pulling all the pieces and the threads together. This is helpful. It kind of leads into our next question, so I'm going to jump to that. What would happen if we took a twist on our acts of love and service in our world and saw it as a conduit of God's love? And my further question is, where does that already happen? So if we're throwing wide those church doors, so our first conversation was a lot about how do we as a community focus and work together on the inside. What would it look like if that radical, intimate love went outside the doors? What would that look like? Have you seen it happen in spaces? Have you seen it happen in wider communities in your own experience before? What did it look like?
I think one thing, and this isn't specific, it kind of goes back to the last question a little bit.
That's okay. It's okay. It's good. It's all conversation that connects.
But I think like what everyone was saying just made me think of, because like I was raised Catholic, so I went through reconciliation, and in Lutheranism, is there reconciliation, or is it more informal?
Like confession?
Yeah, confession.
Yeah. We talk about it being the third sort of sacrament. We do it, but an informal and maybe together as our corporate confession and forgiveness and service. So I don't know. There's lots of other pastors here. You speak up.
I guess like what I was going along the lines of is like I remember going through reconciliation and just feeling very loved, and it's sort of an interesting experience because you're there with a priest but the priest isn't forgiving you. God is forgiving you through that priest. So it's just sort of like an interesting experience, and reminded me of kind of that conduit of like God's love, because it's like God speaking through them, and like you're having this relationship and talking about something that you are like want to, like a sin that you want to give up, and you want to be a better person, and that God can forgive you through this priest. And it just reminded me of that kind of experience.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. That's a great example.
We recently, as a staff at camp, read through Bonhoeffer's Life Together.
And one of the things that struck me from it was this idea Bonhoeffer had that we can't truly be in relationship with one another aside from being in relationship with God. And the only reason that a church community or a religious community exists as a community is because of the common relationship with God. And it's through that relationship with God that we are in relationship with one another.
Very cool. Thanks, Kendra. Thoughts on where you might have seen that intimate love break outside of church doors or be expressed outside? I mean, some of the examples we talked about already do.
I'll give you an example. It's what came to mind, so we'll see if it fits. When one of Tim's sisters got married in Tanzania, we had the opportunity to visit a water project that was native to Kenya, actually, sand dams. They built sand dams. And it was such a moving experience for me. When I came back to Canada, I was talking sand dams to anybody that would listen. And there's an NGO in Camrose called Sahakarini. And that year it happened to be water was their focus. And this Sahakarini is not a church, it's not a faith-based organization, but it is operated by many people of faith. So it kind of feels that way. Well, they took on building one sand dam after doing lots of groundwork and confirming who they were working with in Kenya. And they have ultimately built 3 sand dams because they have been so impactful on the community. An investment of, I think it's now about $25,000 Canadian. Impacts, one assessment said for the first sand dam they built, it had impacted the livelihoods of 4,500 people in enabling sustainable agriculture, renewal of the environment, creating of income for the farmers who have benefited from the water so they can educate their kids, they can pay for healthcare. It was just so impactful. So that's what came to mind.
That's a great example, that breaking open of one project into so many impacted. Yeah, thank you.
So my parents are in their 90s and they live in Medicine Hat, and that's a long way from Calgary. So their neighbors are just so kind to them. And my parents have taped to their wall a picture drawn by, I think she's about 7 years old, and there's 3 like sunflowers on it, and a note from mom, her mom, the little girl's mom, that says, if you need anything, just give us a call, even if you just want to call or want to talk. And then she puts the phone number on it. So, I mean, that is an act of kindness and love in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Reaching out and caring for the elderly during this time. And then there's another neighbor who will try to be the first out there to shovel the walk for them. So those are, I see as God's acting in community through people.
Yeah, those are fantastic examples. That makes me, I'm not going to forget, Regan, but that makes me think of a story. My father-in-law just recently went through some chemo treatment, and he's got neighbors that are 3 little girls, 5, 3, and Babe in arms. And the 3-year-old drew a picture book with her mom of Papa Bill, because that's what they call him, Papa Bill, going through treatment and getting better. So it was her way of processing this thing. And then she gave it to him, and he like, it's got pride of place in the living room, this little storybook. So those little acts can, mean so much. Reagan, what were you thinking?
Well, unfortunately, my oldest daughter, Mary, she had a heart attack on January 31st, and it was a real woman's heart attack where you don't have a lot of pain, but you're enough that you're in emergency at the university hospital, and she's admitted Mazankowski. Long story short, she's doing much better. Right. But the kindness of people you know, small acts of kindness that people have done since this happened has just been so beautiful. I just feel I have to be so grateful for that. Her friends and all that they've done, and like friends of mine, and just things, you know, like all these different things. You know, notes of encouragement, cards, you know, muffins, things like that. Like flowers, all these things. I just feel really supported by all these different people from all walks of life and different faith groups. It's really moving.
Yeah. Deep
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tim.
So to my wife's chagrin, I've gotten into Jesus Christ Superstar, Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, and she just can't stand it. And I'm watching it piecemeal on YouTube, right? So I think I'm getting the whole story, but I must have watched it 10 times. The 2017 stage version with Tim Minchin and anyways, the Brits did a stage version and they updated it. It's a little less screechy. And there's this piece where Mary Magdalene is singing, "Everything's going to be okay. Everything's all right," I think is what the song is. And it just hits me in the gut because it's so creepy and it's pseudo sensual, but where it is that Jesus is so human, right? As far as I can tell from this play, like Jesus is human, and Judas is like, dude, they're gonna kill you. Like, get back in line and let's continue with our mission. Like, we're here to help people. And to me, it just really is a great example of what it means to be passionate, you know, and to wrestle out our calling in the world. Because yeah, there's this sort of ideal, right? There's this ideal we might chase, or there's just like boots on the ground, get the job done. Let's have as big a pragmatic impact as we can and cut our losses. And it's somewhere between these two things that we're constantly wrestling with. And all the while, we don't get any particular privilege. Like, we're human. And that's what hits me in this Jesus Christ Superstar piece, that Jesus and Judas and Mary are all trying to figure out what it means to be human and to be called. And it results in embarrassment and death and discomfort, betrayal. Like, it's not a pretty road. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I'm also gearing up for Holy Week. So I might be in a different place than others.
I think a few of us are gearing up for Holy Week. Yeah, but and how is this wrestling all rooted in love? How is it all, yeah. Well,
that's a great question. And the immediate answer that comes to me is that love is the vision, right? Love is that which is pulling us. And in the case of Judas, again, I'm not saying this is necessarily the way it was, but you could interpret it that both Judas and Jesus and Mary are all asking, you know, and Tim Ray, you know, what does it really mean to love and to be loved? And where will that take us? And it's not sustainable, right?
No.
But it's taken us
on a wild ride sometimes, a wild, wild night.
Next thing you know, you got refugees living in your house, and
and you're giving away food and you're gathering space and you're talking to your neighbor and sending them cards and flowers. Well, I think that might be a good place for us to pause today. I have this is another book that I'm super excited about. It's called Liturgies from Below. Claudio will actually be leading our worship at our next Dubrick Institute this summer. But he's from Brazil, and fantastic prayers. So I want to finish us off with a prayer poem calling for us. It's called Keep Your Eyes Wide Open. And then I'll share the video with us. So Keep your eyes wide open, your hands willing, your hearts generous, your ears attentive, your senses awake, your feet light, your hope alive, and your faith on fire. Go and shine wherever you may be. Go and embrace with tenderness all of life, with its sorrows and joys. Go and know what divinity expects and what your brothers and sisters seek. May the creative force bless you. May the divine solidarity sustain you. And may you be encouraged and enveloped by the tender breath that brings freedom. May you be enveloped by God's love. So I will say thank you again for a great conversation. This just feels like rich, holy space, and I appreciate it. May you know love. May you live love.